Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening. With a frown on his face, Lucian made his way over and knelt in front of them. There's something I've been meaning to ask you too. Why are you two helping me? He asked after a brief moment of hesitation. Archie and Benny exchanged glances before breathing sighs of relief. Phew! And here we thought Daddy knew about our secret. That's because you treat Mommy and Essie really well, Benny said in the sweetest voice possible. Lucian glared at the two of them in an attempt to determine if they were telling the truth. Unfortunately for him, he didn't know them all that well, so he couldn't tell if they were lying or not. After staring intensely at them for a few minutes, Lucian retracted his gaze skeptically and stood up straight. It's getting late. I'll take care of your mommy so you two can go to bed now. The kids nodded obediently and left the room, feeling incredibly relieved that they were able to avoid further questioning. Since Lucian hardly showed any emotion, they couldn't help but wonder how he would react after learning the truth behind their identities. Lucian waited until the kids were gone before turning to look at Roxanne, who was fast asleep. Even the kids can tell that I'm treating you well. What about you? How do you feel about me? He asked while letting out a helpless sigh. Of course, she didn't respond since she was out cold. Lucian then sat down on her chair on the balcony and started working on his phone. After what seemed like forever, he heard a noise coming from the room. Lucian quickly put his phone down and went to check on Roxanne. For some reason, she had a deep frown on her face and seemed to be mumbling something in her sleep. As Lucian leaned in close, he heard her saying, "Why do you keep ignoring me, Lucian? Am I not good enough for you?" Lucian tensed up as he recalled her doing something similar when they went on vacation. I still remember how she got drunk and began mumbling about stuff that happened 6 years ago. Why does she keep saying this? After giving it some thought, Lucian found the answer to his question. Roxanne fell head over heels for me 6 years ago, but I was so caught up with repaying the Pearson family's kindness that I ignored her completely. I bet she went through the exact same pain that I'm experiencing now. Well, I suppose it makes sense that she doesn't see how well I'm treating her right now. With an apologetic look in his eyes, Lucian held her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. He was about to say something when Roxanne furrowed her brows all of a sudden. The next thing he knew, she woke up and struggled to cover her mouth with her hand, but it was too late. She then bent over the side of the bed and began vomiting. As Roxanne instinctively tightened her grip on Lucian's hand, he wasn't able to back away in time and got covered in vomit. At the sight of Roxanne's pale expression, Lucian leaned in to look into her eyes with a frown. How is it? Do you feel any better? In her condition, Roxanne couldn't hear him at all. After vomiting, she collapsed onto her bed and mumbled, "Ugh, it feels terrible." Lucian's heart ached for her when he heard that. After getting up to take off the shirt that she had puked on, he went out to wash his hands and poured her a cup of water for her to gargle with. When he returned to the room, he saw Roxanne standing on her feet. She was taking off her clothes as if there was no one around. While doing so, she continued to mumble, I want to shower." The sight of her stripping jolted Lucian back to his senses. He hurried to her side to hold her back. "Stop taking off your clothes." Annoyed, Roxanne threw him a look of displeasure and insisted, "I want to shower. Move aside." While she was speaking, she began to unbuckle her bra. Lucian quickly looked away, stunned. By the time he turned back around, Roxanne had already stumbled her way to the bathroom door and her slender body greeted his eyes in all its glory. Stupefied by the scene, he could only gawk. Since I last saw her 6 years ago, her figure has grown even more alluring. The drunken Roxanne had even forgotten to close the bathroom door after entering. she turned on the shower and proceeded to bathe herself. From inside the bedroom, Lucian watched everything she was doing with dark eyes. Seeing that she was still behaving as if there was no one around, he closed the bathroom door with a sigh before cleaning up the mess in the room. By the time he was done, Roxanne was still inside. Knitting his brows at the puke she had left on his body, Lucian left the room to clean himself up. No sooner had he stepped out than Roxanne emerged from the bathroom. By then, the shower had helped her regain most of her senses. When she noticed that the sheets on her bed had been changed, she was still in a bit of a daze. Nevertheless, the irritation in her throat reminded her that she had just vomited. But why aren't there any signs of it in the room? Instead, the room looks very clean. In her groggy state, Lucian's face emerged in her mind. While I was drunk, I seemed to have heard his voice. Did he really help me? Holding that thought, Roxanne gave her head a forceful shake, hoping to dispel the thought from her head. No way. There's no way he would have taken care of me like that, and he changed my sheets. I can't even imagine him changing his own sheets. At that thought, Roxanne nipped that possibility in the bud. However, she still couldn't figure out who it was who had taken care of her. Finally, she gave up guessing. After having had a lot to drink, she could still feel her head spinning. Sleep was the only thing on her mind. As a strong sense of drowsiness struck her, Roxanne turned off the lights in the room and went to bed. When Lucian came out of the bathroom and saw that the lights in Roxanne's room had been turned off, he checked on her out of concern. Only when he saw her soundly asleep did he quietly slip out of the room. Before he left, Lucian went to the children's room to check on them. As soon as he opened the door, he saw them chatting while holding a laptop in their arms. At the sight of him, the boys closed the laptop and gave him a self-conscious look. "Mr. Farwell, what brings you here? Is Mommy all right?" Lucian was still wearing the shirt Roxanne had puked on, as he had no change of clothes, but his jacket managed to hide the dirty shirt from view. Looking at their anxious expressions, Lucian asked with a frown, "It's getting late. Why aren't you asleep?" The boys exchanged glances. "We'll go to sleep right away." There was no way they would tell him that their concern over whether their parents would argue was what keeping them awake. Regarding them inquisitively, Lucian said in a deep voice, "Your mommy is already asleep. I'll be heading home now. You boys should go to bed soon." After that, he reminded them, "Don't tell your mommy about what happened tonight." Despite agreeing to Lucian's request, the boys were filled with disappointment. They had initially hoped that Lucian would take care of their mother for the entire night, and when Roxanne saw him when she woke up, she would definitely be touched. Unfortunately, their father was about to leave, and he even forbade them from telling their mother about it. At the rate they're going, when will Daddy and Mommy ever reconcile? Only after making sure the children were asleep did Lucian leave. By the time he returned to the Farwell residence, Estella was already in dreamland. After changing his clothes, Lucian went to check on her. Estella, who had been missing her father, did not sleep well and woke up the instant he entered her room. She rubbed her eyes and looked groggily in the direction of the door. Lucian walked up to her bed and gave her hair a gentle tousle. "Did I wake you up?" Estella shook her head, then wrinkled her nose as she sniffed the air. She looked up at her father with concern and asked, "Daddy, were you out drinking?" Lucian was stunned by her question. He lowered his head to smell himself and realized he was indeed reeking of alcohol. "My clothes were probably tainted by the smell inside the car." Estella maintained her curious look at him. Meeting her eyes, Lucian explained casually, "It belongs to Ms. Jarvis." His explanation jolted Estella awake. She tugged at Lucian's sleeve and asked anxiously, "Did Ms. Jarvis drink a lot?" "Daddy, why aren't you taking care of her at her place?" Lucian sighed inwardly in resignation, for he had almost forgotten how much Estella cared about Roxanne. "I came home after tucking Ms. Jarvis in. She's already asleep. Still, Estella wasn't satisfied with his answer. But what if she doesn't feel well when she wakes up? Daddy, you should have waited until she wakes up tomorrow morning before coming home. Lucian simply chuckled and shook his head without commenting any further. It's not like I don't want to, but if she sees me tomorrow morning, she'll remember that she stripped herself naked in front of me. When that happens, I'm afraid she will fly into a rage out of embarrassment. I might as well let her think that whatever happened was nothing but a dream. Faced with his silence, Estella began complaining about how bad he was at courting Roxanne. Soon, her rambling voice began drifting away, and her eyes could no longer stay open. Until she fell asleep, Lucian didn't explain a thing. The next morning, Roxanne woke up feeling disorientated and was gripped by a splitting headache. The room reeked of alcohol. When memories of the night before gradually returned to her, she could only recall drinking a lot at the celebration party Jack had organized and Jack offering to send her home. However, that was where her memories ended. Logically speaking, the room should be in a mess after I drank so much. But now it looks spick and span instead. If it wasn't for the stench of alcohol, I wouldn't have believed that I was drunk last night. As Roxanne stepped out of bed in bafflement, she accidentally stepped on something. Lowering her head, she was greeted by the sight of her clothes strewn all over the floor. She furrowed her brows at the sight of them and felt as if she had forgotten something important. Despite racking her brain for a long time, she couldn't remember anything and felt her headache worsen instead. Finally, she gave up trying to recall the previous night's events and went to take a shower. Upon emerging from the bathroom, she heard a series of careful knocks on the door. She opened the door and was greeted by Archie and Benny, who looked extremely concerned. "Mommy, how are you feeling?" The children looked at her anxiously. Roxanne smiled and reassured them, "I'm fine. I just have a light headache." Then, struck by a sudden thought, she asked, "How did I come home last night?" After exchanging a quick glance, the boys responded in their piping voices, "Mr. Farwell brought you home." "Lucian?" A hint of surprise flashed across Roxanne's eyes. "I only remember Jack offering to send me home. How did Lucian end up doing so? When did he leave?" Roxanne probed further when she failed to recall the events after the effects of the alcohol took over. Remembering their father's instructions, the boys replied reluctantly, "He left after sending you back to your room." Only then did Roxanne heave a sigh of relief. "Thank God. At the very least, he didn't see me at my worst. It's just that. Did someone watch over me last night?" Roxanne remained unconvinced. The question ignited a sparkle in the boys' eyes. Thinking that their mother had remembered something, they gave her a wide-eye stare while waiting for her to guess. Contrary to their expectations, Roxanne scratched her nose and speculated, "Was it your Aunt Madeline who stayed back?" Archie's and Benny's eyes darkened. They shook their heads and begrudgingly took credit for it. "Oh, we gave you some water and something for the hangover." "Are they saying no one took care of me last night?" Roxanne was just as puzzled as before. "The room is so clean. Did I clean it out of my subconscious obsession with cleanliness despite my drunken state?" She wondered if she was just imagining things because she couldn't help but notice the awkward expression on the children's faces. "Mommy, do you still remember how you met Mr. Farwell?" Desperately maintaining their cool, the boys changed the topic by getting the burning question off their chests. Throughout the night, they had been itching to know how Lucian had found Roxanne. However, Roxanne was just as clueless as they were. All she could manage was an awkward smile. I can't remember too." Roxanne was utterly embarrassed by the fact that she was unaware of how she was brought home despite being an adult. "I must check with Jack the next time I see him." Lucky for her, the boys didn't probe further. They expressed concern for her well-being instead. Roxanne chatted with her sons as they descended the stairs together. In the middle of breakfast, they heard the sudden ring of the doorbell. The boys looked up, their eyes filled with anticipation. Thinking it was their father who had come to see their mother, they snuck a glance at the door. Roxanne, baffled by the boys' sudden delight, got up to open the door. Roxanne. Standing at the door was Madeline, who craned her neck to peek inside as if she was looking for someone when the door opened. Roxanne was about to check with Madeline about last night when the boys hurried over and looked up smilingly at their godmother. "Aunt Madeline, have you had breakfast? Do you want to join us?" Madeline had wanted to ask when Lucian left, but the boys interrupted her. She bent down to tousle their hair and declined with a smile, "I'll pass. I need to go to work. You boys enjoy yourself." She then turned her attention to her best friend. "How do you feel? Are you having a bad hangover? I saw you drinking a lot last night." Roxanne reassured her, "I'm fine other than a minor headache. Anyway, it should be easily cured with a day's worth of rest." Hearing that, Madeline nodded with relief and did not ask any further question. Truth be told, she had to work an additional shift that day. With the hospital calling incessantly to pester her, she could only drop by briefly on her way to work. Upon learning that Roxanne was fine, she said a short goodbye before driving away. Once their godmother was out of sight, both the boys heaved a sigh of relief. That was close. Aunt Madeline almost let it slip. Even though Lucian's actions didn't make sense to them, the boys believed that their father must have had his reasons. After all, Lucian knew they were on his side and wouldn't have gotten them to keep the secret unless he deemed it necessary. With Madeline's car gone, the increasingly curious Roxanne lowered her gaze at the boys. If I'm not mistaken, Madeline seemed to be looking for someone. However, the kids noticed it before she said anything. That's why they were so anxious to change the topic. "I'm sure they must be hiding something from me." Knowing that she might not get to the truth even if she asked, Roxanne decided not to pursue the matter. After they were done with breakfast, she sent them to the kindergarten. Upon their arrival, they saw Estella holding Lucian's hand at the entrance. The sight of Lucian triggered a strange feeling within Roxanne. She wondered if it was just her imagination, but she vaguely remembered hearing his voice the night before. "Miss Jarvis." Estella's piping voice jolted her back to her senses, and she looked down at the former with a smile. Estella raised her head and looked at Roxanne with concern. "Miss Jarvis, how are you feeling?" Roxanne was thrown into confusion by how abrupt the question was. "Daddy said that you had a lot to drink last night," Estella said innocently. Roxanne looked at Lucian hesitatingly, briefly stunned. Lucian had on a calm look. "She caught the smell of alcohol on me, so I told her about it." Not expecting Lucian to explain himself to her, Roxanne was taken aback for a few seconds. Then she turned to Estella and replied softly, "Thank you for your concern, Essie. I'm feeling a lot better now." Relieved, Estella responded with an obedient nod. After watching the children enter the kindergarten, Roxanne turned to Lucian with mixed emotions and started, "The boys told me that it was you who sent me home last night." Lucian nodded noncommittally. He averted his gaze from her and looked to the side as if nothing had happened. In truth, he couldn't help recalling the scene from the night before at the sight of her face. Roxanne trailed his gaze only to see his car that was parked by the roadside. Thinking that he was in a hurry to leave, she decided to get straight to the point. "Can you tell me how we ran into each other last night?" Lucian's face turned cold when Roxanne mentioned their encounter. "We happened to run into each other in the hotel elevator." Even though he didn't describe how he had wrestled her away from Jack's arms, Roxanne had no trouble imagining it. Given his temper, he must have been infuriated to see me together with Jack. It goes without saying that something unpleasant must have happened between them. Nonetheless, what surprised her this time was that Lucian didn't probe further about her relationship with Jack. When the thought struck her, a peculiar feeling arose from within, causing her to recall their conversation the day before. Lucian must be trying to stop me from going to the contract signing ceremony because he and Jack are competitors. And that must be the reason he showed up at the hotel. It was just that he had arrived too late. Is the conclusion of the matter the reason he no longer cares about my relationship with Jack? Holding that thought, Roxanne felt slighted for some reason. Nevertheless, she kept her emotions to herself and expressed her gratitude flatly instead. Thank you for sending me home, Mr. Farwell. Lucian nodded with a frown. Just thinking about the image of her and Jack together angered him. However, when he saw her face, he couldn't help but be reminded of the scene from the night before. Overwhelmed by the clash of opposing emotions, Lucian couldn't bring himself to question her any further. All of a sudden, an inexplicable tension emerged between the two of them. Upon collecting her thoughts, Roxanne gave him a distant smile. If there's nothing else, I'll be on my way then. With that, she walked past Lucian without giving him a chance to react. Lucian's eyes darkened, but he didn't stop her. It wasn't until her footsteps could barely be heard that he finally returned to his car. On the way to the research institute, Roxanne felt unsettled as her mind kept dwelling upon her conversation with Lucian and his attitude toward her. In the past, he would have stopped me and said something if I were to leave just like that. But this time he didn't. As for his attitude toward me and Jack, he doesn't look like he cares anymore. In fact, he didn't even bother questioning me any further. Also, while I spoke to him, he seemed to be in a hurry to leave as if he was trying to avoid me. Roxanne felt the irony when she recalled Lucian's declaration that he wanted to pursue her. After all, she had been stuck in a dilemma for a long time and had even considered if she should accept him. However, she now realized that she had been a fool to have taken him seriously. In fact, she couldn't help but laugh at herself for wondering whether Lucian had stayed back to take care of her the night before. From the looks of his attitude earlier, how is it possible that he bothered to show me any concern? The moment she arrived at the research institute, she received a call from Jack. She schooled her emotions and answered her phone. "Mr. Damaris, what can I do for you?" Roxanne's voice reminded him of the incident last night. "Nothing really. I just want to seek your opinion on something. Herbscape Group hopes you can take on the role of technical advisor for them. I think you're up for it, but what are your thoughts?" Roxanne was stunned by the proposal. It took her a few seconds to agree with a smile. "Since it's something you and Herbscape Group want, I naturally won't say no." Jack chuckled. "I'm glad to hear that." After discussing some details, both of them ended the call. When Roxanne put her phone aside, an avalanche of emotions descended upon her again. According to Jack, my assistance is crucial to the collaboration between Damaris Group and Herbscape Group. Now that I have agreed to take on the role of technical advisor, Lucian would probably be angry with me again when he found out about it. Realizing what was going through her mind, Roxanne put an end to such thoughts and laughed self-deprecatingly at herself. The matter has been settled and the competition between Lucian and Jack has ended. Why would he continue to be involved with me? Meanwhile, Lucian didn't return to Farwell Group. Instead, he drove straight to Queen Group to see Jonathan, intending to discuss the matter related to Herbscape Group with him. Jonathan stood up and greeted Lucian with a nod when he saw him making his entrance. "I heard that Herbscape Group has signed the contract with Damaris Group last night. Our plan to take over Herbscape Group has failed." Lucian took a seat opposite him, looking solemn. Other than Herbscape Group, do you have your eye on any other pharmaceutical companies?" Since Jonathan's expertise was in the medical industry, Lucian would usually seek out the former's opinion on such matters. After pondering upon the question, Jonathan gave a helpless shrug. In Horrington, there's no other company I can think of other than Herbscape Group. That's the only company that will bring us the biggest benefit with a takeover. As soon as he said that, both their expressions turned grim. Jonathan's conclusion was that they had no other choice other than Herbscape Group. However, now that the company had signed a contract with Damaris Group, negotiating a takeover had become significantly more difficult. If we fail to acquire Herbscape Group, our project will be put in a disadvantageous position, Jonathan said matter-of-factly. Lucian nodded in understanding, then began to think of other ways. They had spent a lot of time negotiating the contract clauses with Herbscape Group before obtaining the latter's agreement. Yet Damaris Group swooping in suddenly had caused Herbscape Group to renege on the contract. Now that Herbscape Group and Damaris Group had established a partnership that was well publicized, the chances of acquiring the former were as good as none. All of a sudden, Jonathan suggested, how about I get another company to negotiate a partnership with Damaris Group? We can learn about the price Herbscape Group asked for. Then, if we lower our asking price, we may be able to induce Damaris Group into breaking the contract with Herbscape Group, which will create an opening for us to continue negotiating the takeover. In fact, we may even be able to do so at a lower price. In the event Herbscape Group was abandoned by Damaris Group, they could use it as a talking point. Moreover, it was Herbscape Group that had reneged on the contract first. They were naturally in their debt for doing so. If takeover talks were to be revived, Herbscape Group would definitely feel pressured to give in. Jonathan beamed with pride over his idea that was capable of killing two birds with one stone when he finished. Lucian, however, furrowed his brows tightly upon listening to his best friend's words. Faced with Lucian's lack of response, Jonathan urged anxiously, our project is about to get up to speed and Herbscape Group is an extremely important piece. If we can't acquire them, we'll have no choice but to back out and wait for the next opportunity. That was Jonathan's attempt at questioning Lucian. It was one thing for Queen Group to give up, but Farwell Group had never backed out of anything before. Given their status in Horrington, Farwell Group had always gotten their way regardless of the situation. Plenty of companies clamored to collaborate with them. Unexpectedly, with a brazenness that came out of nowhere, not only did Herbscape Group dare to bargain with Farwell Group, but they even cancelled the contract at the very last stage. If it was any other company, Lucian would have already taught them a painful lesson. However, Lucian didn't react at all this time. He seemed to have prepared to accept the loss without any retribution. Jonathan was frustrated by that thought. Lucian, what's on your mind? Why don't you put Herbscape Group in their place? What is it that has been worrying you for so long? I heard. Before Jonathan could finish, Lucian interrupted. To have been chosen as the heir of the Damaris family, Jack is certainly no fool. If even you can tell that Herbscape Group is the best candidate, why would he give it up over some short-term profit? Jonathan thought there was something not right about Lucian's words. What does he mean by even I can tell? Does he think that I'm inferior to Jack? The thought filled Jonathan with rage. So what if he can tell? When it comes down to it, Queen Group is still the largest pharmaceutical company in Horrington. If we hadn't gotten involved in this project, Queen Group would have already secured the contract to supply the medication. If Jack really wasn't a fool, he would have worked with Queen Group instead. Reading between the lines, Lucian knew that his friend was throwing a tantrum. Despite that, he proceeded to expose him mercilessly. It's precisely because Jack is smart that he has chosen not to work with Queen Group. Based on Queen Group's influence, it wouldn't be a surprise if they wanted a lion's share of the profits, making any negotiations with Damaris Group difficult. On the contrary, Herbscape Group would be desperate to work with them and willing to make significant concessions just to secure the partnership. Jonathan gradually calmed down. He sighed in exasperation when he thought about the stupid comment he had just made. It's true that I had my eye on Herbscape Group for the same reason. Furthermore, they have one major advantage over Queen Group. His words elicited a baffled look from Lucian. In a steady tone, Jonathan said, Herbscape Group is not only involved in traditional medicine but is also skilled in many techniques of modern medicine. Compared to them, Queen Group is focused solely on traditional medicine, and that must be the reason why Damaris Group has chosen to work with them. However, the only mystery left was what Damaris Group had offered Herbscape Group to induce them into reneging on the contract with Farwell Group. Despite having done his own research on Herbscape Group, Lucian wasn't aware of the actual reason Jonathan had chosen the company. Therefore, when the importance of acquiring Herbscape Group dawned upon him, Lucian couldn't help but furrow his brows. Now that the collaboration between Herbscape Group and Damaris Group has been settled, we should take more time to discuss our plans for the acquisition. Evidently, a solution was out of reach in the short term. Furthermore, that issue wasn't the one that was bothering him the most. After giving Lucian an indifferent nod, Jonathan looked at his friend in a thoughtful manner. I heard that Dr. Jarvis has not only participated in the collaboration between Damaris Group and Herbscape Group, but the latter has also offered her the role of technical advisor. I wonder what her thoughts about the matter are. That was the first time Lucian had heard about it. His heart clenched and his already gloomy expression darkened further. I don't know. He had thought that Roxanne would be more cautious after he had revealed to her how Jack had snatched Herbscape Group away from him the day before. Yet little did he expect Herbscape Group to directly approach Roxanne to be their technical advisor. As the possibility of her agreeing to it crossed his mind, Lucian couldn't help but feel incensed. Jonathan was surprised by the drastic change in Lucian's expression. Lucian, have you not succeeded in your pursuit of Dr. Jarvis? When Lucian simply shot him a glance without denying it, Jonathan couldn't help feeling what a shame it was. With how eligible he is, he could have had any woman he wanted. Instead, not only he insisted on keeping his eye on Roxanne, but he also failed in his pursuit despite all the effort he expended. Jonathan cleared his throat, suppressed the surprise within him, and commented with a smile, well, you were at fault 6 years ago. It only makes sense for Dr. Jarvis to resent you for it. The mere mention of the past made Lucian scowl. The 2 times Roxanne had gotten drunk had shown him how much hurt he had inflicted upon her 6 years ago. He no longer felt the right to complain about her resentment toward him and the distance she had placed between them. All he wanted to do now was to make amends. Having innocently assumed that Lucian had made progress in his pursuit, Jonathan had simply wanted to tease his friend. But to his surprise, he ended up rubbing salt in Lucian's wound. In response to Lucian's reaction, Jonathan scratched his nose awkwardly. Don't worry about it. Even if you have made a mistake, there's always a chance to redeem yourself. As long as you seize the opportunity, Dr. Jarvis will surely forgive you. How do I redeem myself? Jonathan was stunned. He didn't expect Lucian to take his casual remark seriously. How do you redeem yourself? How would I know what happened between the two of you? Since he had inadvertently brought up the difficult topic, Jonathan had no choice but to force himself to come up with a solution. Since you hurt Dr. Jarvis 6 years ago and want her to forgive you for it, you obviously need to let her feel that you love her. But I already did as you said. Lucian had been given her flowers and confessing his feelings for her. On top of that, he even had the 3 children help him behind the scenes. Yet Roxanne refused to believe in his feelings for her. In fact, when they had gone their separate ways in the morning, he could feel that their relationship seemed to have deteriorated. The worst part was Lucian didn't even know what the problem was. Jonathan almost choked on himself. When it comes to pursuing women, I am still superior to this hard-hearted friend of mine despite my lack of experience. Also, I have the advantage of having a sister. All this while, Frida has always been very popular and has plenty of suitors. With that thought in mind, Jonathan began to rack his brains to recall what those men had done while courting his sister. After giving it much thought, Jonathan came to a brazen conclusion. What you have done so far isn't enough. Lucian cocked a brow. I only followed what you said. Jonathan was rendered speechless by the snarky response. He was filled with the urge to remind Lucian who it was who needed help. However, when he recalled that Lucian's demeanor would inherently make him bad at courtship, he decided to shoulder the blame. That's because the methods I shared with you weren't enough, he said in resignation. What else can I do? Lucian looked at him in puzzlement. Roxanne's attitude in the morning made him feel uneasy. He wanted to improve the dynamics of their relationship as soon as possible. Scratching his nose, Jonathan suggested, women like romantic stuff. You can consider doing something romantic that will move her. Something romantic? Lucian thought back to the recent interactions he had with Roxanne. Come to think of it, I don't remember doing anything romantic. I might have, but I certainly wasn't aware of it. If, for example, while out shopping, you can surprise her with a gift when she's not looking. Or you can even organize a romantic dinner with her. Knowing that Lucian had no inkling of how to be romantic, Jonathan solemnly quoted a few examples. However, Lucian glowered at his suggestions. I'm not doing that. There's no way I can bring myself to do something like that. Besides, Roxanne would probably see through me and end up doubting my sincerity instead. His reaction filled Jonathan with exasperation. Whatever it is, the point is to be romantic. If those two methods don't suit you, you can always try something else. If you continue to sit on your hands, there's no way Dr. Jarvis is ever going to forgive you. You should sleep on it. He tried his very best to come up with suggestions, but all of them were shot down by Lucian. At the rate the latter was going, he would soon run out of ideas. Upon hearing his friend's words, Lucian pinched the space between his brows. Since I'm the one who wants to make it up to her, I should come up with my own ideas. Nonetheless, Lucian still couldn't figure out what sort of gestures were considered romantic. Suppressing the anger within him, Jonathan advised, at this point, you should just drop your airs in front of her. I have seen how badly she has treated you before, but it could have been worse. If you don't do anything about it, both of you will stay this way forever. He patted Lucian on his back and added, this isn't more difficult than doing business, and you have nothing to lose. If you really want Dr. Jarvis to forgive you, you have to give it a try no matter what. A peculiar sensation swelled within Lucian, and he eventually nodded in acknowledgement. Okay. I'll do it. Hearing that, Jonathan heaved a sigh of relief and sought to make up for his earlier mistake. Even if Dr. Jarvis agrees to take on the role of technical advisor, that's still just her job. Don't let it bother you. Lucian knitted his brows and nodded as he recalled their conversation earlier. Only then did a smile spread across Jonathan's face, and they continued discussing the matter related to Herbscape Group. Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.